On today's show, there are 2 weeks remaining between now and the trade deadline across the NBA, and there's plenty to discuss, including your mailbag questions, the latest news, and more, and all of that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1638 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And the place to go is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code LockedOnNBA when you get there for a first deposit match up to $100. Also, I encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do on the show, to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. On the audio side, places like Spotify, Apple, Overcast, etc. And then we're also on YouTube over on the video side. And today's show is mostly going to be your mailbag questions. I should at least plug at the top of the show. I did full coverage of the 2 games in Northern California on Monday and Wednesday, both very late night podcasts, and including one that dropped 12 hours ago, something like that at this point in time. So as I'm recording this, it's been a busy week already. The Hawks do also play again tomorrow on Friday, so we'll have a show after that as well. But kind of a bridge the gap opportunity here, and a lot of mailbag questions, and a good time to do it with exactly 2 weeks until the deadline arrives across the NBA. And because the Hawks are so far involved in all the discussions going around the league, Dejounte Murray as the headliner, we'll get into some trade stuff on this podcast. And again, your questions. First, though, a little bit of news. I waited until this was actually out there and available, but Trae Young was not selected as an all-star starter on Thursday evening. He was second in the final fan voting, so he actually had a pretty good chance coming into the night when it came to being one of the 2 starting East guards. But fan voting is no longer the entire formula. It's only half the formula, and he finished in a tie for 4th with Donovan Mitchell among East guards. Tyrese Halliburton was number 1 pretty comfortably. And then there was honestly very, very close battle, if you look at the voting results, between Trae, Damian Lillard, Jalen Brunson, and Donovan Mitchell. It ended up being Lillard who had the edge in fan voting. That was why he kind of won a tiebreaker with Brunson. And then Mitchell and Young were right there behind him. And honestly, Tyrese Maxey was close too. So that 2 through 6 was very tight between those guys. And Trae certainly would have deserved to be there in a lot of ways. He's top 10 in the NBA in scoring this year. He's number 2 in the NBA in assists per game at almost 11 per game. But obviously the lack of team success is not going to help you. And, for better or worse, Trae will get the blame for that as the best player on the team. It's not his fault the Hawks are bad this year, but certainly it's not going to ever help you in All-Star voting, LNBA voting, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see if he makes the team. As a reminder, coaches are the ones actually who vote for the reserve. So an entirely different voting block, and we'll see how that kind of shakes out in the next week or so. My only kind of take right now is that it's not crazy that he's not starting. Would it have been fine if he did start? Absolutely. I think he's probably been better than Damian Lillard this year, but Dame's certainly up there with Mitchell and Brunson and Maxey, like all deserving guys. It doesn't bother me too much that Trae's not starting, but I will say this. It will bother me if he's not on the team overall. So that's another discussion. That's about a week from now. We'll find out that, at least in the coming days. So I will probably express a little bit more outrage if he's left off the team entirely. But for now, he was up there in the fan voting. He was 6th overall in both media voting and player voting. And that was kind of what pushed him down a little bit. So not a huge thing, but that's what kind of broke this evening before I started recording the podcast. And there you have it. And from this point forward, basically all mailbag questions till the end of this podcast. There's one that's not necessarily super Trae related, but I want to touch on this one a little bit at the top. So it comes from Corey, who says, I'm sure you asked this question before somewhere. What has to happen to get Mo Gay, Kobe Buffkin, Seth Lundy, and AJ Griffin on the floor more often? Before I get into this, and honestly, it's a question I get all the time right now, I will just say this. If it was me, I'd be playing Kobe Buffkin at a bare minimum on a regular basis already. I've said that before. I'll say it again now. I'd be doing that. Now, Mo Gay is injured. That's why he's not played, and he's been out for quite some time. It's a back issue. That's a real problem for him in the short term anyway. And with that out of the way, it's kind of hard to answer this as far as what has to happen. Quinn Snyder has a reputation dating back to Utah as not the most friendly guy to young players as far as like playing time is concerned. Obviously, he's good at developing players, but Utah didn't really have a ton of like young guys after the Donovan Rudy emergence. They were kind of more of a veteran-laden team. The Hawks have some young players, and we saw actually Quinn kind of embraced Jalen Johnson a year ago. So it's not like he's super anti all young players, but rookies in particular have not always been high on the pecking order for Quinn dating back to Utah. And I would say there's legitimate nuance around both Bufkin and Griffin at this point. I'm not defending the decisions to not play those guys. I'm just going to give you some context here. For instance, Bufkin had a real injury. He missed weeks and weeks with that thumb issue. And for a rookie guard, especially a guy who is, less than 20 years old when they drafted him, that is very, very bad timing. And that undoubtedly set him back quite a ways when it came to like getting on the floor this year. Again, I'm not saying that's right, but that's certainly what happened on some level. I do understand playing him in the G League, and honestly, as far as the rookie's concerned, like Bufkin, I would prefer if the Hawks, and again, I'm not saying they have to do this, but if the Hawks decide that he's not going to play a lot in the NBA, it is way better for him to go down there and play in College Park on a regular basis, play 30 minutes a game or more, have the ball in his hands, and develop and try to learn the scheme, etc., etc. So I'm fine with that. It does make total sense to me, but I will say in the last couple of weeks, I would have played him with the big club a little bit more. Especially with Trey missing a few games in recent days. The Hawks playing guys like Patty Mills and Trent Forrest on a regular basis. Like, those guys are more veterans that kind of know what to do execution-wise, but Buckin's just more talented. I'd like to see them play Kobe a little bit more right now. There are always concerns with rookies. Like, I'm the one that kind of always says rookies are bad, and that is generally the case, especially rookie guards. Like, even Trey, who was an excellent player as a rookie, had rookie moments. Like, most rookie guards are not good. But with where the Hawks are, and that's been a theme of this podcast probably the next 20, 30 minutes, the Hawks are not playing very well right now, which is kind of part of the frustration for a lot of people, and I agree with that. Like, if the Hawks are 26-18, not playing Bufkin would not feel as weird. But with where they're on the standings, it doesn't feel great. So I get all that, and I will say again, I think he would have been way more likely to play minutes by now if not for the injury and the missed time. And it's kind of hard to quantify how much that actually set him back. That's kind of nuanced, though. AJ Griffin's situation is a lot less clear, a lot more murky because of the personal absence that he had. We'll probably never know what all went into him being away from the team for as long as he was. It makes it very hard to analyze from the outside. And by the way, I have asked endlessly people in the organization, on record, off record, all those things about the situation. And to their credit, they've not shared a lot about that, and they don't have to. It's just kind of what it is. What we do know is that he was away from the team for several games. He was not playing much before that. But as soon as he came back, he basically has not played at all. He's been totally out of the rotation, totally off the radar, end of the bench. And honestly, when he's gotten into games, and I will say it's garbage time, so I don't want to make too much of this, but he's not looked good when he has played. I'm not saying that's a negative of everything, but certainly he doesn't look comfortable, and they clearly do not think that he's ready to go right now because he's not like even on the fringe of the rotation. He was clearly not in it the last several weeks. So similar to stuff about Bufkin, I think it might benefit AJ to play some in the G League or play some on the court in Atlanta just to see what happens. Like, he did play a lot of minutes last year and was actually way better than a typical rookie would be, but a lot has changed here. And look, I could go all day on this, and I'm going to stop on this question for now in a second, but the real answer is I don't know what it would actually take. I think if the Hawks clear out some roster stuff at the deadline, which we'll talk about more in a second, that could open some playing time up. But look, right now, the Hawks have played guys who are not exciting players in their places. Like, they're playing, again, Patty, they're playing Trent Forrest, they're playing Garrison Matthews, who are, all different skill set kind of players, especially Trent as a two-way guy. Like, playing over Kobe looks a little bit strange. And I'll be the first to say, I do understand the frustration from fans on a team that currently, as I'm recording this podcast, is 8 games under 500 to not be playing its last 2 first-round picks essentially at all while they're playing these nondescript veterans. Like, I get that. That is frustrating. There's no question about that. And if it was me, I would be, at least Bufkin's more straight ahead. Like, I would just be playing him. AJ, there's at least more of a reason to be a little bit less sure with personal absence, the way he was kind of been treated after that, etc. But like, for now, I'd be playing Kobe, and I think I'd be trying AJ if they possibly can, and we'll see if those guys, get any more time in the future. But I'll kind of leave it there for now. But long story short, Snyder's not going to tell us. Quinn does not like to reveal information about the way he's like kind of thinking about rotation stuff. And for now, they're just going to lean on the veterans, and hopefully, you would imagine that changes at some point. But we've not seen it just yet at this stage. All right, we have more Mailbag questions coming up, I promise you, on all kinds of trade stuff when it comes to, the landscape and Murray and Capella and Hunter, et cetera, the finances, all of what's going to go into what's going on here with the Hawks in the next 2 weeks. Before we get to that stuff, though, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today. Today's show is brought to you by Grammarly. I speak from experience when I say that writing can be really hard sometimes. And when it comes to writing, Grammarly is there to support you from start to finish. For more than 10 years now, Grammarly has been powering things by using AI technology that you actually trust to help you get to where you need to and write the absolute most and the best that you can. And right now, Grammarly is helping you do even more. With even one click, you can easily brainstorm, rewrite, and reply with suggestions based on your goals and context with Grammarly. It helps you be productive for yourself and for your team. And I know Grammarly has been huge for me in the past, helping make things clear when I'm working on some writing stuff. It also cuts down on time that I use for editing purposes. After all, I do a solo podcast 5 times a week, and there's a lot of writing that goes into that, I can assure you. And if you want to polish some stuff up as far as your writing is concerned, Grammarly can help you to rewrite and actually help you to be concise instantly. Also, if you have a presentation coming up in the future at work, they can help you to create a personalized outline to get you organized, make your presentation even more compelling. Or if you need to just sift through your emails at a quicker pace, Grammarly can help you with summarizing and bringing suggestions for faster replies. And the best part about Grammarly is that it's also free to use. And you can start being more productive at work right now by going to grammarly.com/podcast. Go there right now and download it for free today. One more time, that is Grammarly. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks, and PrizePicks is the largest DFS platform in North America and also the most exciting and the easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. At PrizePicks, you pick 2 to 6 players and choose whether they'll have more or less than a projection in a ton of different categories across the board. But it's 25 tons of money. 25 tons of money on your entries, and you can also pick common projections across the board now that allow you to include 2 or more players from different sports or different leagues. They have a huge selection of sports and stat types not offered anywhere else at PrizePicks, and they also have projections on the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, and many more. They have the reboot policy at PrizePicks, and they're the only DFS platform right now that has an injury insurance policy. I've enjoyed checking out PrizePicks for quite some time now, all year long, as far as it's like really every day on the NBA side, NFL stuff on weekends, etc. And on the whole, the experience is easy, it's fun, it's intuitive. I really recommend it at the highest level. It's really bringing a lot of entertainment as well. And the place to go is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code LockedOnNBA for a first-time deposit match up to $100. One more time, that is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA when you get there. Check out DFS made easy with PrizePicks. All right, a question now from Crimson Slims, who says, based on what have you seen from Quinn's coaching philosophy, what kinds of players would you be targeting for the Hawks? So part of this always is who's available, and Quinn, of course, inherited the roster that he has right now. I've always said it doesn't really match what you would exactly expect for Quinn. That's kind of always the case, and they didn't change a lot this summer, which was kind of confusing, but they also kind of banked on Quinn making changes to the philosophy stuff, which has happened. It just has not worked all the way at the top level, basically. On the other side, most coaches don't have exactly what they actually would want perfectly. It's kind of hard to do that in the NBA, so it's not an exact science necessarily. The Hawks do seem to be building around, at least be keen on building around Trey and Jalen. So you have 2 guys who can get rim pressure. You have a plus shooter in Trey, and of course an elite passer and an operator in Trey. You have this super versatile forward in Jalen with defensive upside and size and range. That leaves you with great optionality, which I think is good. I think in general, in a vacuum, Jalen is a good partner for Trey. I think ideally you'd have a center that can shoot it at least a little bit and not like a total non-shooter like Capella currently is. Now, that isn't a deal breaker. I think Trey is so good at throwing lobs and being engaged with centers like Clint that you can run all what you need to run pick and roll wise with a more traditional guy. Clint's getting up there in age, of course, but obviously a younger guy ideally, but they could do that. So it's not like a deal breaker, but you kind of just need shooting at the other 2 spots if that's a non-shooter at center. I think Jalen's going to be an okay shooter, maybe even a good one. Not a great shooter probably in the future, but especially if you have a non-shooting center and Jalen, you're going to want more shooting around those guys at the wing spots. Ultimately, there's a lot of attention paid to Quinn's desire to get a lot of threes, and that makes sense. He has preached that, and that is true. But he also always talks about getting rim pressure, and I think that's kind of always overlooked in some ways because threes are more of a low-hanging fruit for this team dating back to previous regime. But the Hawks don't have a ton of guys who get to the rim right now. It's basically Trey and Jalen that do that. Sadiq Dejounte can get there, but he likes to pull up a little bit short of that most of the time, etc. I think you also want some defense, of course. That's not like a huge surprise. You're going to need somebody to defend point of attack at a high level. You're going to need some wing defense. Every team in the league wants wing defense, but certainly that will be the case here. And you need shooters. So in the future, I think Jalen's going to have the ball more in his hands, which will help. But I think ideally, the Hawks have had too many lineups in the last couple of years, even with Dejounte now, where they only have 2 ball handlers, or maybe even 1 ball handler. Right now they have Trey, DJ, and Jalen. That's enough ball handling. But when one of those guys sits on the bench, they don't really have a bench guy. I mean, Bogey could kind of do it a little bit, but in general, they haven't had a ton of like optionality with their offense. So this is like a full podcast in itself as to like what Quinn will be looking for, but it's kind of vague on purpose what I'm saying here. But I think a lot of it comes down to roster constraints, who's available, all of that fun stuff. And I think general versatility is good. Defense on the perimeter would be very, very important. Rim pressure would be important. And of course, having enough shooting, because we've seen it in the last 3 years for the Hawks. When they don't have enough shooting, things clog, and that really hurts them. So, with Bogey healthy, knock on wood, that definitely helps, but they might trade him in the future, all that stuff. And I'll leave it there for now. Speaking of trade stuff, I got a lot of questions from my guy Chris on Twitter, who asked a ton of stuff. By the way, I know I've lost my camera on YouTube briefly. Hopefully that will come back in a second. I'm working on that now as we're talking. But anyway, Chris asked a bunch of questions, but I'll pick one of them out here. And basically, are they even trying to trade Bogey at this point? Couldn't he be used to assemble the war chest of picks that they are looking for? Also, John Nelson asked if the Hawks could get a Herder-like return for Bogey at this point in time. And I would say that is plausible to me that they can get a Herder-like return for Bogey. I'm not sure they're trying to trade Bogey at this point, but he is very available if that makes sense. Like, I've heard the guys the Hawks are making more active calls on are, of course, Murray's been in the mix a lot, but Hunter and Capella, those are kind of the three that are the most involved in like outgoing Hawks kind of pursuits. I think they like Bogey, and they should. He makes a lot of sense. And also, he's on a really good contract. It's descending. He's an excellent offensive player and a good culture guy around, all that stuff. On the other hand, if they're looking at all to make a kind of retooling effort with a step back this year and an eye toward the future, Bogey's getting older. That makes sense. And if you can get a real price for him, I would at least think about it. Now, that would make you worse. Like a lot of the deals that we've talked about around the Hawks, like I think they could make a deal for Capella where it wouldn't kill them because they have a Cottonwood. Like it would hurt them. I'll be the first to say I think trading Clint for basically nothing would not help the Hawks in the short term, but it would help the Hawks long term, I think. Bogey would hurt the Hawks flat out. Like in any construction that I could reasonably see, that would make them worse because his offense is really valuable. But if you can get a real pick, let's just say for Bogey, like an actual first, to John's point, they could do that, and I think that's plausible, and I would certainly understand them doing that. I think it would be protected, as John kind of alluded to, that's kind of the Herder package was a protected first round pick. Bogey's older, but it's a cheap contract, and he's a really good player, team-friendly deal. Team option at the end really helps that deal as well. So we're 2 weeks away. It wouldn't surprise me if they moved Bogey, but at last check, it was more of like taking calls than making them. That's kind of the way I'd put that. He's available like a lot of guys are, but he's not like the guy they're trying to move. Speaking of which, Mr. Magoo asks, we know about Murray, Capella, and Hunter, but who else could the Hawks trade between now and the deadline? I thought about Bogey a second ago, obviously. He's on that list. The other guys I would circle in particular, are AJ Griffin and Saddiq Bey. So there's been some reporting out there a little bit in Rumble, nothing huge, but that teams are at least calling on AJ Griffin. I've heard the same. As I talked about earlier with him not playing, it's hard to know the dynamic all the way around right now with AJ and the Hawks, but it would not surprise me if the Hawks just decided to kind of move on and get a fresh start for all parties. I'll say this, people ask me kind of like what his value is. It's not that high right now because he's not playing, and I think they could probably get something for him. It's not going to be a total giveaway situation, but like you're not going to get the equivalent of what you paid for him, quote unquote, in using a mid first round pick for him. That isn't coming back, I don't think, in a vacuum. But he might need a fresh start. I'm not sure. They'll get some calls on him, and it wouldn't stun me if they moved on at this point in time. Bey is interesting because they traded a lot of stuff to get him. 5 second-round picks a year ago. He's one of their top 7 or 8 guys. He plays in every game. Right now without Hunter, he's starting, playing a lot of minutes, and he should. But he'll be a free agent this summer. It's restricted, so they can match on him if they want to. But they would prefer kind of, not to overpay, obviously. If they're not planning to pay him or match on him or prefer to keep him around, they should certainly look at the market. Now, that's only they can answer that. And it really kind of always depends, or most of the time depends on what the market is. Like Saddiq, the reporting was, and I heard the same thing, that him and his agent, they wanted a lot of money in an extension, and the Hawks didn't pay that. That was a good decision, I think. I think Saddiq will have a market this summer, but it won't be for huge money, and it shouldn't be. I think I've said this before, but I think Saddiq is best suited to be like a 7th man on a good team, which is not a bad player. But I think that he is not a starter on a good team and shouldn't be paid like one. So that's kind of where we are at this point in time with Saddiq's weaknesses, etc. They can match any offer if they want to, but if they're not keen on keeping Sadiq with where they are financially, they should explore what the market is. I don't know if they're going to, but that was a guy I would also circle, which is essentially, again, from what I understand, they are at least less likely to trade guys like AJ and Sadiq than they are of the Murray Capella Hunter group that are even more available. But I'll say this again, like I've said it a few times in the last couple of weeks. Everyone is available. That's been reported. I have heard the exact same thing other than Trey and Jalen. There are always tiers of availability. I've said that before, but like I don't think that they are super interested or excited to trade guys like Okongwu or Bufkin. I think those guys would be number 3 and number 4 in some order and least likely to be traded after Trey and Jalen. Like it could happen, but they're not looking to do that. Then there's guys who like they're more eager to trade, like your Capellas, your Hunters. They like Bogey. They would trade Bogey. I think Sadiq and AJ are kind of in that mix somewhere. And that's kind of all of your core pieces. I just referenced basically all of them. The guys at the end of the bench, your Garrison Matthews, your Bruno Fernandos, those guys could be traded at any moment for salary fill or whatever, but like they're not going to be traded for huge positive value. So as far as like the top 10 guys are concerned, they're all available on some level other than Trey and Jalen, and that's kind of where I'll leave it for now. But everybody should be at least on the board, and that's been the feeling that I'm getting behind the scenes as well. All right, we'll have more from your Mailbag questions in a second, but first, a word from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by Hungry Roots. Are you trying to get healthier this year? I know I am, and Hungry Root is here to help you by making meal planning easy, and it's also nutritious. With Hungry Root, you can build habits around eating healthy that will not disappear for you by the month of February, and they also have support for gluten-free and vegan and vegetarian, dairy-free, low-carb options, and much more. They save you money on groceries, and when you eat out less, you save money and you save time. Hungry Root is also the easiest way to get the fresh, high-quality food delivered to you at your door, and they have healthy groceries as well as simple recipes all in one place. They will give you a fun and short quiz, and they will actually get to know you and your goals, how you like to eat. They'll ask you what kind of flavors you like, which kitchen appliances you have, and which ones you'll use, and also really more beyond that, a lot of detail if you want it. And then they'll get your needs and preferences together at the top of mind and start building your cart with delicious recipes and all the grocery needs that you need for your upcoming week. And they'll also recommend recipes and groceries to you based on your own tastes. You can actually take those suggestions, or you can choose anything you want to, from fresh produce to high-quality meats and seafood, healthy snacks, and much more. Hungry also gets you beyond your weekly grocery haul with thousands of easy recipes that actually put your groceries to use before they get forgotten in the back of that fridge of yours. And at Hungry, everything tastes great. Also has to be quick to make. And they also want to have everything contain whole, trusted ingredients. You can spend less time meal planning, shopping, and cooking, and more time enjoying the healthy food that you will actually absolutely love with the folks at Hungry Roots. And right now, they are offering Locked On Hawks listeners 40% off your first delivery and free veggies for life. Go to hungryroot.com/lockedon to get 40% off your first delivery and get your free veggies right now today. That's hungryroot.com/lockedon. You don't have to get that promo code and that link. It's hungryroot.com/lockedon. Okay, a question from Manny who says, how much does money matter with what the Hawks are going to be doing with trades? Or are we going to have to hear the same thing about Tony not paying the tax yet again? I got a question as well from Chris Dyer about why none of the exceptions have been used so far for the Hawks. It's all kind of the same lens. I'm sure I have new listeners, and I think I've been pretty much the loudest and most consistent person in the actual Atlanta media market trying to go after the Hawks about avoiding the tax and ownership and kind of the cost cutting and making the team worse, basically, to stay under the tax in recent days. I won't go through it all again, but they basically glaringly avoided the tax on purpose in the last couple of years. The Kevin Huerter trade was money motivated. The John Collins trade was entirely about money, basically. They were high profile and obvious. They also have a lot of other examples that were like more subtle to avoid money. Cost cutting trades and not using roster spots and not using exceptions. They've done that for a few years. And it's not like this one's not tax savings, but they've also sold draft picks in the past when the only reason to do that is actually money related. So as Chris notes in his question, the Hawks did not use their mid-level exception this year as well. If you want to be super generous and not care about the Hawks avoiding the tax, because some people just don't care about that, and that's to each their own, I guess. The Hawks are about $9 million under the tax right now. So if they wanted to stay under, they could have signed a player that was a real non-minimum player. And for a team that quite obviously has had lots of depth issues this year, another guy that would have been like a solid 8th, 9th man would have been very helpful for this team, and they didn't actually do that. They also have a trade exception for Collins. They could still use that, so we'll see on that, but they've not used it just yet. And to answer the question, there is every reason to believe the Hawks are going to be keeping a very close eye on finances, and that's a notable factor in any trade they consider. Now, some of that is that's the nature of the NBA. every team on some level has to manage the cap and the trade rules. It's not like baseball where you can just trade whatever you want to money wise. So you do have to plan your financial books long term for basketball reasons. But there's still something different with actually ducking the tax every year on purpose and making your team worse to do it, because there are ways to keep teams under the tax or making small moves, but like the Hawks have done it with like some of their top 7 players. They've just kind of cut guys for money, and that doesn't. I think we've seen that long term, that just making your team a little bit worse for money savings each and every year isn't going to work. Anyway, I will do the short version on how much it will impact this deadline now, because look, right now the Hawks are up against the tax for next year without doing anything, which is really scary for a team that's this bad at the moment, or at least not very good at the moment, to be charitable. A quick primer here: they have almost 160 in terms of $1 million guaranteed money for next year. Most of that is on their real guys. Trey, DJ, Capella, Hunter, Bogey, and Okongwu is about 143 for 6 guys. Then you have the rookie contracts: Jalen, AJ, Kobe Lefkin, Mohamed Gay, about $15 million between those guys too. So they're already $16 million over the cap line with 10 guys on the roster. So I get questions all the time about like cap space. Cap space is something that I would not worry about. The Hawks are way over the cap right now, and it's hard to get under the cap for any reason. It's really the tax that you're looking for, and they're basically up against the tax right now. I will do the short version and just say, if they were to sign Saddiq Bey, even to a bargain contract, they'll be in the tax with nothing else. So I don't think, especially if you throw in, if the Hawks also might have two first round picks, which is a good thing to have if the Kings pick comes, but that actually has a real cap hole that costs money, etc. So not to go long here, but the thing I am pretty confident in is between now and the end of July, the Hawks are going to change something and probably get cheaper when they do it. So whether it's the Murray deal, if that happens, whether it's moving off from Capella for very little salary, maybe it's moving Hunter, maybe it's moving Bogey, whatever else, they're going to get cheaper, I believe, in one of these transactions, and they're going to change something. We'll come back to one more question at the end of the podcast about like this deadline, but this is extending out, let's just say again, like to the end of July, August. I will be shocked, especially with where they are right now in the standings. Maybe if they get hot this year, that will change, but if the Hawks pay the tax next year, I'll be very surprised. And right now, with their current roster, they're kind of up against it. So that means that you will probably see some cost cutting if I had to project. Again, it's not a guarantee. I'm using the word probably, not definitely, but that'd be my projection. They're going to save some money somewhere, whether it be to jettison Capella or jettison Hunter, which is, by the way, defensible basketball-wise. Those deals are not great deals. So that would be understandable, but you would hope that they prioritize basketball over finances, and we'll see in the future if they actually do that. Question from Sebastian, who says, for you, is it worth it to be getting into the playoffs this year if the Hawks are in the play-in, or would you rather bottom out and try for a better draft pick? Tough to answer, I'll say that, especially on January 25th. There's nuance there. If it was as simple as the question indicates, like if the question basically is, would you rather be the 10 seed or bottom out? I think I'd rather be bottoming out. Now, that's not a vacuum in general. Right now they're the 10 seed, and Dallas is a good example from last year. Dallas, though, actively tanked to keep their pick. They actually owed their pick, and that's why they did that. Not just because they wanted to get a higher draft pick. They actually just wanted to keep that pick overall, and that got a lot of attention, but ended up quote-unquote working for them. The Hawks could miss the play-in this year very easily. They're kind of on the fringe of it right now, and miss the playoffs, and they'd be in the lottery if they did that. There is a ceiling, though, this year on like how much quote-unquote tanking would even help you, because the teams at the bottom of the league this year are so bad. There are 5 teams that John Hollinger is taking to call in the forlorn 5, that the Hawks, no matter what they did, if they could shut down everybody right now and just say, send Trey home for the rest of the season, they're not going to do this, by the way, but if they did, they still wouldn't be able to get below those 5 teams. That's how bad those teams are. So there's a ceiling on that. As far as like the people that are calling for tanking, I wouldn't necessarily advocate that, but there are benefits as well to making the playoffs. Like, I'm not trying to be the guy who dismisses any of that. Like, it's good to have experience and reps against high-level competition. I think the Hawks actually did learn things from the series last year against Boston. Of course, they lost it. Miami the year before that. Like, there are teaching moments. There are valuable experiences to making the playoffs. I'm not dismissing that. But if the question basically is, again, be the 9 or 10 seed, and I would say the best case scenario at that point in time is a first-round loss to a team like Boston or a team like Milwaukee or Philly or whatever. That's not a great thing to be like stuck in the middle. That's kind of where the Hawks have been. That's not a great place to be in general. But the thing that's notable here is that the Hawks don't have their own pick again after this year for the next 3 after that. And that's kind of why this comes up even more often. So it's not cut and dry in any direction. I think we're going to have to learn more and more about like what the deadline plan is. And look, man, in general, I would love to know the actual answer for the organizational priority right now, because it's a question I get all the time from people around the league that I talk to. It's like, what are the Hawks trying to do big picture? And like, it's unfortunate, but depending on who you ask around the team, you get a different answer. Are they trying to win now? They're playing like they're trying to win now as far as like their roster deployment. They're trying to win games, but not playing rookies, etc. But also they're the 10 seed in the East. There's been some reporting that the Hawks might be ready to kind of retool and maybe sell and get a little bit worse willingly this year, which I would think is reasonable. They're not going to buy, I don't think, but is it like more of a status quo? Even in a Murray trade, like I've intentionally not done a ton of Murray talk on this podcast because it's been so much around right now, but in a Murray trade, there are different pathways. Like one of them is more of a future-based draft pick approach, and then the other one is like more of like a retool the roster and keep trying to win approach. And like I don't know which one that's going to be, if it even happens, but yeah, there's questions they have to answer, and only Tony Ressler and Quinn Snyder and Landry Fields and Kyle Korver know the answers, and they might be arguing about that right now. We don't know, and there's 2 weeks left, so we'll see. All right, last question for today. By the way, that last question could be a whole podcast, but I'm not going to do that right now. Earl says, how likely are the Hawks to do something, in all caps, by the way, before the deadline? And what would be the case for not doing anything if you were the Hawks? I'll answer the second part first. The main argument for not doing something is simply that there's nothing available to them that they think is favorable to do. Now, to be very clear, I would personally be actively pursuing some major shakeups to the roster if it was me. If I was in charge, that's what I'd be doing. And I'm betting I would have a lower bar for returns on some guys than some people would. But fundamentally, the argument against making a trade is always going to be that the right deal is not there for you. It's kind of impossible to know on the outside what's out there and what's offered to the Hawks, etc. Even with intel, like you're never going to be on 100% of the stuff in the room. So how likely are they to make a trade? I think it is more likely than not, so 51% or higher, that the Hawks will make a transaction of significance in the next 2 weeks. Now, for me, that means trading someone on the roster that is in the top 10 of trade guys. So like, I think trading AJ would qualify for this. Trading Bay would qualify for this. Trading Hunter, Capella, etc. Those will all be significant. It doesn't have to be Murray. It doesn't have to be Capella, whatever. But I think they are more likely than not going to trade someone who I describe as a real key piece of the roster right now. So individually, I don't know if anybody is super high on the list as far as the percentage wise. I think Murray, just for the record, my percentage on likelihood of Murray being traded, I should say, is a little bit lower now than it was a week or two ago. I think I'm leaning towards him being traded still, but with a little bit less conviction than I had a few months ago. A few weeks ago, I should say. They'll be looking for ways to move Capella or Hunter. That's going to keep happening. They're going to be listening hard on other guys, Bay, Bogey, Griffin, etc. So we'll see. But to answer plainly, I do think that I'll be doing an emergency podcast at some point between now and the deadline. It might be actually right at the deadline. We'll see. Not a guarantee by any means, but to answer that last question last, I think that is more likely than not that the Hawks will make a move of some kind, and we'll see what that move actually is in the next 2 weeks. Before we get out of here real quick, the Hawks do play again on Friday. Both teams on 3-game losing streaks as Dallas arrives. Injury report-wise, by the way, Trey is questionable as he tries to exit the concussion protocol. That's a good sign, but TBD on whether he actually plays on Friday. Capella is also questionable with a calf contusion. Bruno is questionable as well. So in a world where the Hawks don't have Capella or Bruno, that would be kind of challenging because the Hawks only have one center in that scenario. I think, by the way, somebody asked this question. If that were to happen and Capella Bruno didn't play, I think you would see Okongwu as much as possible. He has foul trouble issues and can't play every minute. And when he's off the floor, you would probably have to see center Jalen because there's nobody else. So that would be a little bit of a challenge against a team in Dallas that has some real size, but hopefully Capella or Bruno or both can play in the game on Friday. Also, Wes Matthews was upgraded to questionable after missing the last 9 games, so he might return in this one. Hunter's still out. Gay's still out. Krejci's still out. Dallas has some injury stuff as well. Kyrie's questionable, notably there. So no betting odds just yet on that game, but a fascinating one. It's NBA quote-unquote rivalry week. Not really a huge rivalry between the Hawks and Ravs right now, but there's obviously the Trey Luka connection. That's kind of what's out there. But anyway, I'll have a full breakdown of that game as always after the game on Friday. I will be in the building for that one, so stay tuned. Please subscribe rate and review the podcast as always as well. Tell a friend about the show. I would very much appreciate all of your support. And thank you for listening to a rambling podcast, I'm sure, but I always appreciate your questions. Send them to me all the time on social media, as well as lockedonhawks@gmail.com if you want those answered. Hopefully I will get to a bunch of them in the coming days. And one more time, thank you for listening to the podcast. Please subscribe, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And please spread the word about the podcast. Patreon.com/BT Rowland as well. Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate it. And we'll see you after the game on Friday.